Kicking off the list at number 10, ancient exercise. Athletic gear today is amazing. We have shoes that correct your stride while you're running. We have backpacks filled with water. We have clothing now designed to keep you cool. How does it even, what? It's quite impressive stuff, but just how did ancient civilizations do it? What did we do before New Balance opened? You know what I mean? Well, ancient Greeks, believe it or not, used to work out naked. Completely naked, just butt nude. The word gymnasium actually translates to the Greek term gymnasion, which meant school for naked exercise. That sounds like a pretty insane school. Xavier's school for gifted youngsters or Ezekiel's school for naked exercise? How do we pick? Naked exercise? That's the worst place to see naked people, in my humble opinion. Should I go to the squat rack? No, maybe not. I don't know. Hey man, do you mind spotting me? Actually, never mind. I'm actually good, thanks.
In our number 9 spot today is the mass grave of the headless Vikings. It was a sunny day. Just another casual digging expedition for these archaeologists, digging up the side of an old roadway in Dorset, UK. But suddenly, they dug up something extraordinary. It was a grave site for 54 Vikings, and they were all headless. The leg and arm bones and heads and torsos were all together neatly in separate piles. The archaeologists didn't know what to make of this, so their theory was that these people were captured by the locals and they were murdered and dismembered by the villagers who took some of their heads for souvenirs. Well, that's terrifying. Later on, they revamped that theory and they believed that perhaps this was some kind of ritualistic sacrifice performed at this time. Yeah, perhaps scientists didn't want us to know this because, well, that is terrifying. Coming up in today's 8th spot, we have something that I personally think is highly unsettling, and I would like to inquire as to why wasn't this on the news stations everywhere around the world when it was discovered? Because this one is kinda hard to believe that it is real. Oh, what is it? Oh, it's just a cat that was carved into the hills of Peru. Yep, a cat. Come on, a cat? That's so creepy. I mean, I'm a dog person myself, so perhaps I'm a little biased, but I mean, cultures have been known to worship and honor the cat throughout centuries, including the Egyptians and, well, North Americans nowadays. They have, a lot of crazy cat ladies, but who knows, maybe there's a higher reason that cats were continuously worshipped and perhaps we should honor them. This cat geoglyph was found in the Nazca Desert and it is said to be the oldest one in its region, dating to 200 BC to 100 BC. The cat is apparently 120 feet. Wow, how isn't this more known? I'm mind blown. All the crazy cat Karens are saying, excuse me, I knew this. Coming up in our 7th spot today, we have the Tomb of Sunken Skulls. Found in the bottom of a prehistoric dry lake bed in Motala, Sweden, archaeologists stumbled upon a mysterious stone structure. After some digging, they were able to eventually unearth animal bones, stone tools, and 8,000-year-old skulls of 10 people aging from young to old. Sometimes it's hard for me to fathom that it is possible for archaeologists to know that something is really that old. Like, how is this possible? That we are able to know this, and yet we haven't made a time machine yet. But also, if you really sit and think about how far we've come in the last 100 years, it really makes you think, holy, I wish I could travel in time to see how people actually lived then. Because even with our discoveries to paint a picture, it's still quite hard to imagine. They also found fragments of one skull deliberately put into the skull of another. What purpose was this for? The archaeologists concluded that actually 11 people were butchered in a stone hut, with no other discovery as to why. But one last final horrific detail: some of the skulls had stakes embedded into them, and it was concluded that they were perhaps mounted for some funeral purpose or as a sort of trophy after the defeat of its opponents. In our 6th spot today, we have a discovery that honestly, I wish I didn't know about. For all the mothers out there that are feeling a little sensitive, definitely, close your ears to this one. While on an expedition deep in the underground sewer in Ashkelon, Israel, expecting to only find dirt and, well, poop, archaeologists discovered thousands of tiny bones. After further inspection, they discovered that the bones were of newborn babies, maybe around 100 of newborn babies. Just horrible. It wasn't completely uncommon though for ancient times to dispose of newborns, particularly girls who were considered not as valuable to the family as boys. But it is interesting though that there were actually quite a few boys that were found. It was and still is so curious that those bones were disposed of in a sewer. If I could guess, I think this sounds like the case of some religious sacrifice, but Who knows? In our 5th spot today, we have the Mammoth Graveyard. An expedition in Russia led to a discovery of what looks like a graveyard of mammoth bones from 25,000 years ago. The site has been under excavation since 2014, and it is said that it measures 40 feet across. Whoa. At this point, archaeologists still don't know how it was built, and also why. What was the purpose of this? I suspect aliens. Aliens came down to Earth and had a sacrificial mammoth ceremony and then gathered all of the bones in one area and left them for us humans to eventually clean up. That sounds possible. In our 4th spot today, we have severed hands. While on an Egyptian expedition, a group of archaeologists whom were digging near the ancient city of Avaris discovered a few chopped off hands. The hands were found in what was once a throne room, and therefore there was an immediate understanding that this was some kind of gesture for the king. The team ended up discovering 14 hands, and the even more interesting part, it was all right hands. The hands are about 3,600 years old. Eventually, it was discovered that they were buried when King Kian ruled over the city. Only through reviewing ancient writing were they able to put the pieces together and see that during this time, the soldiers would present a severed right hand of his enemy to the king in exchange for gold. It was said to be a symbolic gesture, showing that they are depriving their enemy of power as they will no longer have their hand. Fascinating. It's crazy to believe that we humans once were in a headspace where we were chopping off hands so as to take other humans' power away from them. Fascinating. In our 3rd spot today, we have the good old Neanderthals. Archaeologists have discovered that some 40,000 years ago, Belgians, also known as Neanderthals, were practicing cannibalism. They used to make a meal out of their friends and create tools out of their bones. At least they weren't wasteful. This discovery was made in a cave where Neanderthal bones were discovered along with marks of butchery. There were also bones of horses and other animals in the cave, but they seemed to be stripped apart just like the human bones were, leading the archaeologists to conclude that these Neanderthals seemed to make no distinction between man and animal, which poses the question, at what point did we start making this distinction? And are there still people who don't? Google the conspiracies around this at your own risk. In our 2nd spot today, we have the claw. In 1986, while on an expedition on Mount Owen in New Zealand, a giant claw was found. Deep within a cave in the mountain, the archaeologists discovered this massive beast-like claw. It was eventually discovered that it was the 3,000-year-old remains of an upland moa, a flightless bird that went extinct, which you would think to be impossible as well. It kind of reminds me of how all the Kardashian-like girls wear their nails these days. I mean, how do they function with those nails? I can barely type and I barely have nails. Melissa. In our number 1 spot today, we have the chemical warfare. On an expedition in 1933, archaeologist Robert de Mesnil du Buisson discovered 19 Roman soldiers in a tunnel. Apparently, they all look like they died trying to flee from something. I can't imagine what during those times. Traces of sulfur and bitumen were actually found along the walls until it was eventually discovered that all signs point to this being one of the first attempts at chemical warfare. Whoa. And honestly, hopefully one of the last. That's all I'm saying.
And at number 10, we have the Curse of Tutankhamun. As I see it, this one is either number 1 or number 10. This is probably the most famous mummy curse of all, so I could squeeze it into the number 1 spot, but also I want to keep this list a little bit unpredictable. This tomb was opened back in 1923, and on the wall of the tomb, it read, "Death shall come on swift wings to those who disturb the peace of the pharaoh." That is a pretty clear message. I don't know why no one picked up on the fact that something was going to go down if they opened up this tomb. But as we know, when it comes to colonizing, the people involved rarely pay attention to the negatives. The leader of this excavation died from blood poisoning, and 7 more people died prematurely. There's one thing that I will never do, and it is open up some old mummy tomb because I don't need that bad mojo in my life. I only want good vibes that get brought on from drinking ocean spray and riding a longboard.
Number 9. Egyptian tomb curses. The walls of Egyptian tombs are fascinating. The paintings, or sometimes carvings, were meant to create a peaceful afterlife for those who had passed on. Pharaohs were buried with their treasure, favorite foods, everything wealthy that they owned. They believed they could take all of that with them to the afterlife. This belief, of course, welcomed grave robbers, so in order to prevent any Nicolas Cage national treasure hunters to come snooping by with their flashlights, many of these tombs had curses written on the walls. This one is warning trespassers that gods will wring their neck like that of a goose. Also, if I I walked into somebody's property nowadays and it said trespassers next will be wrung out like a goose, I would leave. I would turn around immediately. You don't have to be an ancient Egyptian god to get that message across. I'm good. Also, buried in Mastaba, inside the found tomb of Ankh-Mahor, a pharaoh official from 4,000 years ago, a curse was written. Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. It also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Again, there's that, or there's beware of dog. Number 8. Dung beetles. Ah yes, dung beetles, the poop beetles, also known as scarabs. They're the only species in the entire world that instinctively follow the Milky Way. They just know to follow the Milky Way. How insane is that? You know how some animals just know to do things, like sea turtles, when they're hatched, they immediately sprint to the ocean to avoid, being plucked by giant seabirds. They know to go towards the sea naturally. These beetles would naturally follow the line of the Milky Way, and they would at the same time roll their poop towards it for some reason. First species in the animal kingdom to do this. So are dung beetles trying to phone home? Why does their planet need so much poop? Why are they rolling it towards the cosmos? Does Thor need this? Does Odin need all this? Symbols of these beetles are seen either in hieroglyphics in Egypt, but also near the sacred lake at the Temple of Karnak, there's a massive dung beetle monument, a poo-poo bug monument. Look at this thing, it's beautiful. There's even a legend still to this day behind the statue that if you walk around it 9 times, you would find health, wealth, and love. The scarab is there to represent the god Khepri, which at the time, Egyptians believed was the sun. I grew up thinking the sun was a baby. Thanks, Teletubbies. Number 7. Weak wine. When we think of ancient Greeks, we think of wine and parties and apparently naked exercise, right? But was it really a drunken festival of love all the time? Did they rock and roll all night and party every day? Ancient Greeks rarely drank wine without diluting the hell out of it first. The water to wine ratio was something like 4 to 1. 4 to 1! That's insane. That's basically just water. That's crystal light you're drinking. I guess it's a good thing because you don't have to worry about waking up at 4 a.m. dehydrated. The ancient Greeks believed that drinking undiluted wine could cause blindness or insanity. Again, I think that's just called being drunk and maybe blacking out. I don't know. The 4th century poet Amphis had your back though. The best way to cure those ancient hangovers, according to thee, was to boil cabbage. And in order to keep the party going without embarrassing yourself after drinking too much sparkling Merlot, the key apparently was to bake and eat a pig's lung. That's the trick to never getting drunk. Again, I think that's just food that helped here in this situation. Either way, if you're gonna drink, do so responsibly. Number 6. Greek statues. We've all done it at one point, okay? You're at a museum, you see the statue in front of you. It's massive. The dude has like 16 abs, he's made of bronze, he's 12 feet tall. The amount of detail gone into their body and all those muscles, it's jaw-dropping to say the least. Their fingernails, their dimples, muscles everywhere. But did you know ancient Greeks would make statues, they would make that small on purpose. Men who were, well endowed were more often than not fools. They only ruled for lust. If you had a big brain, however, oh, buddy, you were the talk of the town. They would whisper in the wind as you pass by. I heard Alexander has a massive brain. Have you seen his brain? Whenever an actor would play a fool on stage, they would be given a comedically large setup. That's how you know he's the fool/villain. The way we see these statues today of these ancient rulers, it meant that they had self-control and intelligence. This whole time I thought they were just in a cold room, but you know what? That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help. Hit that like button. I'm here to historically help you on your statue knowledge. Number 5. 2020 mummies. Yeah, as if 2020 wasn't stressful enough, here's some more. Turns out we also found a lot of mummies. I'm glad Brendan Fraser's returning to Hollywood because it sounds like we might need him to suit up again real soon. I don't know. Back in 2020, while we were stuck inside watching Netflix, more than 100 sealed coffins were found in Egypt. These findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations like Persians and ancient Greeks. These coffins were still occupied, still untouched, and hidden for thousands of years. The discovery has confirmed that Saqqara was the main burial site of the 26th dynasty, including the first known burial pyramid. That's a scary pyramid. Number 4. Colosseum hecklers. When the Colosseum was built in 80 AD, about 50 to 80,000 fans of Roman sport would just pour in. The energy here was high. This was their only source of entertainment. They didn't have DVDs or anything like that. So some fans would get so into the action that they would heckle gladiators. Well, just like a comedy show, when you heckle, they too can hear you. You're throwing off their entire game, and that's a no-go. It's gonna have to stop. Other people are also here trying to enjoy the same show. Today, a 19-year-old usher will ask you to keep it down a few times before kicking you out. But in Roman Colosseum days, buddy, you didn't get a warning. One of Rome's more violent emperors, Domitian, he was a die-hard fan when it came to the Colosseum and its games. So much so that one guy in the crowd heckled a gladiator one day, and the emperor had him pulled from the audience and then thrown into the center of the arena. And also, no, he did not leave that arena that day. Hey Maximus, smile! Me? Number 3. Crappy jobs. The groom of the stool was perhaps one of the worst jobs to have in the Middle Ages, but it's one of the most important. The groom of the king's close stool was a position created during King Henry VIII's reign. Their job was to wipe the king's behind. Yeah, and if that doesn't sound horrible enough, this poor lad would also have to carry around the king's stool with him on his back, like a backpack, like he's going to school with a big backpack full of poop. He would also have to monitor the king's meal times, and they would also plan their day around when they thought the king was going to experience a bowel movement. They were just gonna have to wait around until it happens. If I were the king, I would be so anxious if a little dude just started hanging out near me. He's like, "Hey boss, you feeling all right? You good? A little full? A lot of bread you ate there, eh? Why don't you take a 5? Trust me. Trust me." This job was an honor to have. Sons of noblemen were awarded this role. You would get pretty close to the king, I mean, obviously, but as time went on, these grooms o' stools became secretaries to the king, eventually getting a higher pay and benefits. Number 2. Vatican's secret archives. The archives are 53 miles long. There's around 35,000 volumes of catalog in them, and the Vatican's secret archives are honestly no joke. They're very real, but in order to see them for yourself, it's gonna take some time. Those indexes are not public, hence why I included it in this top secret video. You're welcome. Only scholars can access them after they're 75 years old. Their official purpose is to house official paperwork, and of course it's a treasure trove of anything and everything related to the Pope. It's also full of ancient documents, because I mean, where else do you safely store a letter from Mary Queen of Scots, for example? Yeah, Mary Queen of Scots was killed after serving roughly 20 years in custody, but eventually she was sentenced to death for conspiring to kill Queen Elizabeth I. Before she met her fate, however, she wrote a letter to Pope Sixtus V, literally begging for her life. But evidently, the Pope did not intervene, and on February 8th, 1587, Mary Queen of Scots was executed. You know, letters like that. For example, I've played too much Assassin's Creed, I think, in my life. Vatican letters? I'm on my way, Ezio. Let's do this. Number 1. The less armor, the better. It's 70 AD, it's ancient Roman times, you're walking into the Colosseum, you're feeling hyped, right? You're eyeing down that 8'6" monster in front of you, his name's Gore or something terrifying. If you had to battle these guys, you would want a weapon of some sort. A Nerf bat, give me, like I don't care, literally anything. Weapons in the Colosseum were a necessity, but did you know some gladiators would use nets to fight? Nets, like they're catching butterflies. This class was referred to as the Retiari. Their combat style was built around the ways of fishermen, hence the nets. Yeah, Popeye versus Maximus. Place your bets, guys. Who's gonna get it? Popeye would for sure f him up. More often than not, these gladiators would use nets and a trident. How cool is that? They would take their time too. They also wouldn't wear any armor. They try and keep it light and be fast. They would take their time avoiding these mighty swings from these colossal warriors and then eventually, you know, tire them out. And then when the time was just right, they would toss a net over them and then proceed to poke them as hard and as fast as they could. They would poke the of them. It helps to be quick, but if you've seen Game of Thrones, you know spears don't always work.
First up, in our 10th spot today, we have screaming mummies. Okay, when you think of a classic mummy, what do you see? I'm going to assume you just replied, I see the mummy's face, and it looks like it's screaming as its mouth is, you know, wide open. For a very long time, it was believed that mummies found with their mouth open were possibly people that were tortured to death, especially those found with their hands bounded together. But in most recent years, scientists have learned how silly that theory might be, because most mummies are actually found with that permanent screaming expression. During the mummification process, if the jaw isn't strapped shut, then the jaw naturally falls open when it begins to decay. But then again, we're also sure that some of the mummies were most likely buried alive, but it is possible that it could be too hard at this point to fully know.
Coming in at number 9, we have the severed hand. If you're super rich and powerful, I think you reach a point where you just start collecting things because you have nothing else to conquer. Instead of finding some sort of inner peace and moving away from material life, you just consume endlessly, trying to fill the empty void inside you, but trust me, it doesn't work. Sir Bruce Ingram was a rich and powerful person in England, and he had some friends who were digging up mummies in Egypt. One of his pals sent him over a mummy hand, and it was a gift, not something I would want to be sent. I'm more into practical gifts. I would be happier with a kettlebell. But something Ingram's friend should have told him was that there was a bracelet on the hand that said, "Curse be to he who moves my body." Yeah, I definitely prefer the kettlebell over a cursed mummy hand. Well, the curse came in full swing when Ingram's home caught on fire and then was hit by a flood. I guess in one way you could look at this as a blessing because water puts out fire, but his home was trashed. Coming in at number 8, we have the Curse of SENMUT. Some curses haven't got the opportunity to activate. On the wall of SENMUT's tomb it says, "His life shall not exist on Earth." That's a pretty clear threat and a curse I don't want to dabble with. However, this guy might get his shot soon. People are currently working on this tomb to make it a public attraction. I'm sure one person going through there will slip up and get cursed. Also, the translation says, "His life shall not exist on Earth," so I think ladies are free to visit. Coming in at number 7, we have Mummies on a Boat. Someone get Sam Jam on the phone. I have an idea for a movie. This story comes from 1699. Mummies must have been a huge hit back then. There was no TV, so digging up some old dusty bones with witchcraft attached to them would have been one of the most exciting things you could do. Well, in 1699, a book came out called Treatise of Embalming. There was apparently a true story in this book that talked about a man who was transporting 2 mummies he had just purchased via sailboat, and something very strange started happening. The ghost of the 2 men started to appear on the boat. These visions were terrifying and probably a warning that something worse was about to come. So this man did the intelligent thing and he threw the 2 mummies overboard. If he had kept them on board, they would have eaten him up faster than Joey Chestnut eats tube-shaped meat.
Oh, sorry, 3, 2, 1, go! It's the 100th anniversary and we are underway.
Coming at number 6, we have the Curse of HERMERU. This is a nice sounding curse on the wall of some guy's tomb. It reads, "I shall seize his neck like that of a goose." So this dude isn't going to put a curse on you that will give you some sort of sickness that takes you out. He's going to personally come to you and choke you to death. Also, they had geese in ancient Egypt? Who knew? I thought the first goose was born when Wayne Gretzky scored his first goal. Coming in at number 5, we have a cursed thief. Here's the thing. If you're gonna steal, you need to follow these tenets. Make sure you don't get caught. Make sure the item has high resale value, and make sure that the item you're stealing isn't cursed. If you follow those rules, you'll be a master thief before you know it. But this is one of the most famous stories in Don't Mess with Mummies. A German tourist decided he would visit an Egyptian tomb and steal something from a mummy. Little did he know you're not supposed to do that. The tourist eventually got extremely sick, became paralyzed, and then died from a mysterious cause. Now, what made this case so famous was when his stepson sent the cursed item back to Egypt. It arrived at the German embassy in Egypt with a note saying that the son felt in order to lift the curse from his family, he had to return the artifact to Egypt. Coming in at number 4, we have the Book of the Dead, a spell book from ancient Egypt that has been said to give the person who can control it the power to control the dead and walk amongst those from the afterlife. That sounds like quite the party trick. I don't know if that would be something I would mess around with in my day-to-day. I try to avoid death at all costs, so trying to decipher a cursed book of the dead sounds like it would give me the future I would not be looking for. And it should be no surprise that Aaron Amber, one of the men involved in excavating the Book of the Dead, died just a few years after it was dug up. Him and his wife were hosting a wondrous dinner party. They were probably bragging about this amazing book they found, and someone made an offhanded joke about ancient Egypt, and then next thing you know, Amber's house was on fire and he died there. So I don't know if you want to try and read that book, but I think I'll skip the opportunity for supernatural powers at the risk of death. Coming in at number 3, we have the Curse Consumes You. I don't know what it would be like to be cursed. I can imagine it wouldn't be fun. I think it's probably the feeling you have when you haven't done your homework and you know it's due tomorrow but you still don't do it, and now you just have to sit there in your anxiety while you continue to not do it. If anyone has survived an ancient Egyptian curse, let me know in the comments. But for archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White, it would seem that the curse was able to work its way into his soul and take his life. White was found dead after he committed suicide by hanging himself. White was an archaeologist who disturbed quite a few mummies in his day, so if curses are real, it's safe to say that this dude had a curse or two attached to him. Now, this is where the urban legend surrounding his death works its way in. Apparently, there was a note left behind that said, "I have succumbed to the curse which forces me to disappear." The note might be made up to add some spice to the story, but if it's real, you can bet I will never dig again just in case I bump into any mummies. Coming in at number 2 is the Curse of Osiris. You think if you were digging up a tomb in ancient Egypt and you found a statue of the god of death, you would just turn around and go home. Like, not even back to base camp. You would just pack up all your things, fly all the way home, and start working as a used car salesman. Just a complete complete fresh start. Well, some people aren't as quick to abandon ship as me, and maybe they should be, because back in 1971 there was an excavation of a mummy's tomb in Saqqara. The head Egyptologist came across a statue of Osiris, and instead of going through with the little game plan I just laid out, he removed the statue of the god of death from the tomb and took it back to his office with his assistants. Once him and his assistant were settled in, he stepped into the bathroom to relieve himself, and that's when his assistant heard screaming coming from the bathroom. He rushed in to find the Egyptologist on the ground. He succumbed to some sort of paralysis and then died the next day. So a mystery paralysis that kills you in less than 24 hours could be explained by medical science or a spell from the god of death. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Titanic mummy. We like to think that the Titanic sank because of human ignorance, and that's probably what happened. Saying that a boat was unsinkable in the early 20th century is one of the most insane claims you can make, but it's still fun to speculate on the supernatural. But this is how the story goes, and just so we're clear, the majority of this story is 100% true. There was a museum in England that was housing the mummy of the Princess of Anamera. It was a wonderful piece of history, but it was said to be cursed. Rumors of the curse being true seemed to solidify when a museum guard died out of nowhere. So the museum thought it would be a good idea to get this thing the hell out of there and then send it off to America. This priceless mummy from ancient Egypt worked its way onto the Titanic, and then we know what happened from there. Some people seem to think that it was the curse from this ancient mummy that brought down the unsinkable ship, and maybe they're right.